Thanks for joining us today. We're sorry that you were unable to join us on January 13th at the annual Treasurers Meeting where we rolled out the fiscal year 22 annual appropriations, but what follows is the presentation that was given that day, so we hope you enjoy it. Thanks.
Missed that. All right, beautiful. Thank you so much for having me here this morning. As Kevin mentioned, sorry we all missed that great breakfast that you guys usually serve, but I guess we can say it is what it is. We've got to kind of adapt to our current environment, and so here we are, electronically presenting. I've done a number of these over the past year, video conferencing with boards, in other, finance groups and other people. So haven't been out much lately, put it that way. So one of the things I kind of want to echo Michael's comments on the Worcester staff. During all of this, I have to say, we need to collect a whole lot of information to do our work and get all of these results to you. And they didn't miss a beat. Everything we asked for, we got timely. We were not running up against any, hard deadlines. We were able to do our work just like we have every other year. So kudos to Colleen and the rest of the staff for being, super responsive to the information that we require. And it's a lot of stuff we've got to collect in order to prepare these valuations and get all of the calculations done and reports prepared, and ultimately getting all the information to each of the member units, because that's really what it is all about, right? What you guys are needing to contribute on an annual basis. So what we're going to do today, we're going to kind of go over the valuation that we prepared. We have you all have a member unit. We call it the member unit statement, which is a total, all the details relating to the system as a whole, as well as to each member unit. We're going to talk about the FY22 appropriations, which are the appropriations coming due this July/January of next year. We always go over this, why did the appropriations increase, and when will this end, kind of thing. Talk a little bit about some of the GASB information that we prepare for you, each of the member units, to include in your annual financial statements, and we'll open this up to questions when we're all through. So for those of you new and do not know me, my name is Linda Bournival. I am the founder and owner of KMS Actuaries. We are a firm with a staff, and I have to say, we kind of didn't miss a beat in this whole shutdown, COVID, nobody going into work, because my staff, we're kind of like a national firm. We have 3 staff that works with me, and we are located all over the place. I'm in southern New Hampshire. We have an employee in North Carolina, 1 in Virginia, and 1 in Long Island, New York. So this is how we operate. We operate remotely. We don't see each other much. Maybe that's why we get along so great. Who knows? But we are very in tune, very connected. Nobody can be away from their desk more than 15 minutes without somebody screaming at them. So, it's probably even a little more controlled, because we can tell when they're working and when they're not. So that is us. I am a fellow of the Society of Actuaries. That just means that in my young adult life, I spent most of it studying for exams. I'm an enrolled actuary under ERISA. And I guess out of these credentials, the most important one is that I'm a member of the American Academy of Actuaries. And what that means is we have a code of conduct, and we have what's called actuarial standards of practice that we adhere to. We are a self-regulating profession, which means there are no state or federal or local governments overseeing our work. We actually self-regulate, and our members hold each other accountable to the public, to making sure that we're providing, good information and good consulting to you. I've been doing this work for a long time. Just means that, we're old. And So I've, worked with Kevin for a long time back from previous employers. So I guess hopefully that gives you some assurance that we know what we're doing. Okay, so let's get into the meat of this stuff. We do evaluation every other year. What that means is we knock on the door of the retirement staff and we say, okay, let's get some information on all of the members. That's every single person who is either collecting a pension benefit right now, whether it's a retiree or beneficiary. We're looking at anybody who may have been in the system, left their money there, and has since terminated and moved on somewhere else, and also every active employee contributing to the system. So we are collecting what we call demographic information on all of those people, their dates of birth, their gender, their benefits, their group code, are you a group 1 or group 4, their salary information, everything. And all that data is a snapshot. Who is here on December 31 of 2019? We also collect the asset information. Again, it's a snapshot on December 31 of 2019. And so what we are going to do is we're going to develop what's called liabilities. Really just what do we think this system is worth? What are we anticipating to pay out over the long run until literally the last member dies? So it's over the next 80 years possibly. And what are those liabilities? What do we think we need to pay out? And we compare that to the actual value of assets. And we say, well, is there a shortfall? Is there excess assets? Well, at this point, we are still in shortfall situation. And that's how we begin the work in developing the annual appropriations and the funding schedule that the board has adopted. All right, so on 1/1/20, again, this is a snapshot. It's on that day, all these calculations are done, and we use those results to develop FY22 and FY23 appropriations. Why just the 2 years? Because again, we have to do this valuation every other year. So the valuation results are used for those appropriations, and 2 years from now, just like 2 years ago, we knew it was only FY21 and 20, we would have been revisiting again to recompute for the next 2 years. So that's where we are. We're recomputing for 22 and 23, and 2 years from now, we're going to be here again, recomputing for 24 and 25. As you know, for those of you who've been around long enough, we used to allocate amongst the member units based on the salaries for each member unit, but several years ago, we switched that to what's called the actuarial method. And that just means, again, because we're collecting information on every single person, we know how they contribute to the liability of the system as a whole. So we divvy it up amongst all those member units and come up with the appropriations for each of them. In addition to the appropriations that are, the most important part of our work, there's some ancillary stuff we do, and that's the GASB disclosures that are needed for your financial statement. So that's kind of like a part 2 of the work we do every year, and providing your disclosures for probably what was your FY20 or is, but if you're working on them still. And next year we'll be doing this again for the December 31, 2020 disclosures for reporting in FY21. Okay. So each of you received a member unit statement, and what those represent are really just a summary of, how do we do this? How do we look at every single unit, and how does this valuation appropriation come to be? And so again, we collected all that data, we summarize it for each of the member units. You'll see at the top of the top section, the summary of the member data. Here's the, why did my appropriation increase from the last time we got one of these? Well, you might be able to kind of glean something from this member unit data. If you at one point had, no accidental disabilities, for example, and now you might have 1 or 2, that might contribute to an increase in an appropriation. Or your salaries increased over the 2-year period, in an amount greater than what we anticipated. that might mean that your benefits that we're projecting are going to be a little larger than we initially would have anticipated 2 years ago. So that's a good, litmus. You want to kind of look at that, make sure that your member statements, and we're going to go into those a little in more detail of each of the pieces. So we'll hold on to your statement and we'll continue talking about it in a little. The whole statement really comes down to, you've got your summary of your member data, the valuation results, and I'll explain what those are, and then how did we get the appropriations from there. Okay, so as I mentioned, the retirement system staff provides us with a data file or two that holds all of the active member data, the inactive member data, and the retiree data. And all of this is, as as each of you provide, whether by payroll or monthly or in some manner, you're providing all of this information to the retirement board, and they in turn enter it into their system. It gets compiled for the whole year, and that is what is provided to us. And we always say our results are only as good as the data used. We do a fair amount of data scrubbing, cleaning up the data. We want to make sure that every retiree's pension benefit makes sense, right? Is it 3 cents or is it $3,000, or what is it? We want to kind of validate the data with the staff. So we edit the data, we send a list of some questionable things, some missing things, and then they provide results and answers back to us that we enter into our system. So these are the kind of main, there's a lot of other data points, but these are pretty much the main items that we're looking for to be able to run a good valuation. So here's the first part of the chart that I was talking about. And again, you can kind of see, how do you compare to the Worcester Regional system as a whole? So these are the components of this particular member unit's data. Now, how do you get a 0.714 of an active member? Well, as you guys probably know, you may share resources, right? There may be a town treasurer who might work for 3 different towns and is paid by 3 different towns. Well, we don't want to count that treasurer 3 times. They're really only one person, right? And the other thing is, they're at the end of the day, they're only going to get 1 benefit. So what we have to do is we've got to put that person, the 3 of them, the third, if that's how they're split, into a person. We value their benefit, we value their liabilities, and then we pull them out again. So that's how somebody could become a point, a point of a person, a partial person. Most of the, like I said, it's mostly that kind of thing that's going to happen with your active membership, is that you're a shared resource amongst various units within Worcester Regional. Okay, so this kind of just gives you a summary of all the data points that are used for each of the member units. From there, we calculate liabilities, and liability components are broken into two pieces. All right, we've got a benefit amount that we're trying to fund for, and we've got some past benefit amounts that we kind of hope our assets are adequately set aside for. So there's the piece of the past, but then there's the piece of each year's current. All right, and you can think about this as everybody contributes member deductions, right? That's kind of the current year's, piece of the benefit. So for this example, this particular member unit, if you see that line under C, which says expected employee contributions, those are the member deductions that are made during the next year. All right, what we expect the person to make. A total normal cost, the normal cost is always going to exist for an ongoing system. And what I mean by that is every active employee, when they work 1 minute in the year, they're accruing more benefits. So there's always a cost associated with the benefit they earned in the current year. That is what the employer normal cost is. So one of the things that people always are talking about is, oh, when will my system become fully funded? Can't wait for my Worcester Regional to never talk to me again about giving money to my annual appropriation. Well, that's not 100% true. What it means when you are fully funded is you have enough assets set aside to pay for all those past benefits that you've accrued. But because the system is ongoing, there's always new benefits being earned by your active employees. So there'll always be an employer normal cost unless the employee funds their entire benefit. And that isn't the case here. There's also expenses that need to be paid. You know, the retirement office needs to turn on the lights. They need to pay for audit fees. They need to, pay for postage. There's a lot of expenses that go into running a system of this size. And so those things are always going to be part of the annual appropriation. So that's one of the pieces. The other piece is, when you talk about the unfunded nature of the system, there's always, it's sort of like a mortgage. You've kind of borrowed the unfunded liability, and now here's the mortgage payment to pay it off. So that unfunded liability that each member unit kind of has, right? We've got to pay an appropriation, the portion of the appropriation toward reducing that unfunded liability to zero. All right, so that's kind of like the nuts and bolts of, these are the two big pieces of information that we need to get to the appropriations. And so here they are. So we've got an employer normal cost I just talked about. We have that amortization payment towards the unfunded liability. We have some early retirement incentive programs that were put into place in 2002, 2003, and a small one in 2010. Those are still being funded. What that was some an offering made by allowed by statute to a number of employees, probably was based on particular age and service that they had earned as of the day of the program, and were offered maybe an incentive to retire. And of course, those cost something. And for each of the member units who accepted that ERI and that somebody actually retired under it, they will see on their appropriation member statement, the unit statement, some ERI payments. We have what's called the net 3/8C transfers. That's the amount that Worcester Regional is expected to pay out, in the coming year for members who used to be in Worcester Regional, have since left and retired somewhere else. Well, they did earn some of their benefit from this system. So the other systems actually kind of send the bill asking for a payment toward their benefit in that year. Same thing happens the other way around. There may be somebody who retired from Worcester Regional who earned some service maybe at the city of Worcester, or maybe at Middlesex County, and Worcester will in turn send a bill to those systems. Generally what happens in most regional systems is that the system generally pays out more than they receive. So we add that to our appropriation because it's a known cost that's going to happen. And as previously mentioned, we've got administrative expenses that need to be paid to keep the system running. And all that is part of your appropriation. So here's those items, right? You've got your normal costs. So for this particular unit, their total appropriation, when you add up all those pieces, was a little over $1 million. And as you know, it's probably one of the best discounted items available. If you this $1,054,082 is computed thinking that half the payment's going to be made on July 1 of 2021 and the other half on January 1 of 2022. We offer a discount to say if you pay the whole thing on July 1. And so for this unit, we've got probably about a little under $20,000 savings by paying that 6 months early, paying the entire appropriation on July 1. Okay, so if you are a study of the actuarial report that I believe is up on the retirement systems website, we do have a evaluation report that has a 30-year forecast of the annual appropriations. And you'll notice that for many years of the schedule, the appropriation increases by a little under 10% per year. And that's a schedule that's really been in place for quite a number of years now. And we call it a schedule that, quote, still works. Statute, Chapter 32, of the general laws say that every system in Massachusetts must be fully funded by 2040. That means this mortgage payment, the payment on the UAL and all the ERIs, must be fully paid off by 2040. The retirement system has a schedule in place again, and all that's disclosed in the valuation report, and it's going to be paid off by 2036. Why 4 years earlier than the statute? Well, you want to kind of keep a buffer. You want to be a little more conservative in the event, and it's not, you know, we know what happened in 2008 and what potentially could have happened here. In the event that the market has a severe downturn, you want to have a buffer. You want to be able to like have some wiggle room to extend that schedule for a few years. So staying at a 2036 or 2035 or somewhere in that range is good practice, and it's kind of, you know, recommended by PERAC as well, that they like to see schedules on or around 2035. So we want to kind of stay there. We want to stay, you know, in that range. All right. So again, there's different things that happen, you know, that why the schedule went up by 995. We're sort of artificially capping it there, but each of the components still does increase by a certain amount. Again, the normal cost from the prior appropriations increased about 8%. The amortization payment increased about 11%. The ERIs, those are fixed. They're always going to increase by 4.5. So if you do have one of those, you know that that part of your payment will always increase by 4.5. Already mentioned that you get that early payment discount. And then I'm going to kind of go through a couple little hypotheticals, like how come you're saying 9.95, but my appropriation went up by 10, or it went up, you won't complain, by 8, right? So why does that happen? Well, here's an example. It really depends on how heavily weighted your two pieces, the normal cost and the unfunded liability. If you look at these two examples I've shown here, you'll see that one of them has a much smaller unfunded liability, kind of like as compared to the normal cost, that the other one does. All right, so the first example here, this could be a group that has maybe some relatively low salaries in the group, lower than usual, or not many group 4s, right? Or, you know, this could be like a school district, right? But oddly might have a lot of retirees, a lot of unfunded liability that is kind of outweighing the normal cost. So as you can see by the math, if the normal cost goes up 8%, but the amortization piece goes up by 11, and your amortization piece kind of is more heavily weighted, you're going to get a higher appropriation increase than as I show in the second example. Do you see how the unfunded is a lot kind of smaller than the normal cost, same normal cost? And so, you know, it's just weighting that one of the pieces went up by 8, the other went up by 11. And so this kind of group might only go up by 9%. So that's why there's different things happening, because we're looking at real people. We're looking at the people within each of the member units. You know, the system as a whole, normal cost went up 8%. System as a whole, the amortization piece went up by 11. But then you get into variations when you start drilling down to the different member units. So that's sort of how you can, you know, look at the math to see why did I land in this, you know, as this kind of increase. Okay, this is just a little graphic on where we've come from in 2008 to now. And just to go over this, the blue bar is the accrued liability. This is when you talk about the liability, like we project all the benefits, every single valuation. We've done this, you know, since the beginning of Chapter 32's requirement back in 1988 to fully fund by a certain date. This accrued liability is the actuarial mathematics in developing what ultimately will be due. All right, why does this increase like it does? Well, there's a ton of reasons why, and we'll go over that in the next screen. But, you know, time value of money is one thing. Benefit changes, you know, we increased the COLA base in this time period. We increased assumptions. We decreased investment return assumption. Lots of reasons why this goes up. what are you trying to accomplish? We're trying to accomplish that these assets, either the market value or the smoothing actuarial value, keeps up, right? Well, we know what happened in 2008, which is, why you're going to see a reduction in the funded status from 08 to 10. But assets, I mean, we know over the last 15 or 20 years have not really kept pace with how these accrued liabilities have increased. And that's why you're going to kind of see what we call a little bit of flatlining of the funded ratio. Funded ratio here, or funded status, used interchangeably, those terms, is going to be your assets divided by your accrued liability. How much, what percentage of this accrued liability is covered by assets? And as you can see, it's a little shy of 60% here. Maybe it's like 56 or 57. So this, sorry, the line, it's more where the line is. So we're in maybe about a little under 50. All right. So already mentioned, we've got a ton of reasons. Blah, this is like an awful screen, but these are all the possible reasons why the unfunded liabilities changed over time. Just passage of time. That's what I mentioned. There's new benefits always being earned, and people 1 year older, getting closer to retirement, all of that. Benefit changes. Some of these are probably COLA-based increases. Probably here some in 2018, some modest change, but I believe it was 2016 we might have increased to a $16,000 base. Assumption changes, mortality improvement, a known fact that people are living longer. So we've been trying to catch up our mortality. How long do we really think people are living? So we review that every time we do evaluation, and we adjust our schedules accordingly. Investment return rates definitely are going to be in these assumption changes. So liability mathematics, as you remember, the lower the investment return rate, the larger the liabilities. They work opposite. And what we mean by that is, if we only assume, let's say, for example, 7% return in our assets, means I need more money today to get to where I want to be, right? At a 7% return, as opposed to like a 9% return, right? So when you lower your investment returns, and the markets are proving true that long-term outlooks really have come down over the past several years, and the board has adopted over the past several years schedules that reflect that realistic assumption change, that we do know that assets are not going to earn the 8.5%, 9% returns we might have thought 20 years ago. And so we're adjusting as we go. Actuarial gains and losses, a person lived, we thought might die. A person got a salary increase much larger or smaller than we thought. We have a lot of assumptions that go into these valuations. And so they're always going to be a generation of actuarial gains and losses. Nothing is perfect. Our assumptions for every member, the over 3,000 people who are collecting a benefit, and the over 7,000 member, we just are not going to hit all these assumptions. We want as a whole, this is a large enough system that as a whole, somebody might have gotten more of a salary increase and somebody else not as much as we thought. We're hoping on a whole that we hit our assumptions, accurately, but that just isn't going to happen. So actual gains and losses are just a common theme output of these valuations. And we do review all sources. We check why are the liabilities here when we thought maybe they should have been there. Oh, look at this, salary increases greater than we thought, people living longer than we thought. I mean, there's some that work the other way too. So those are a big component of why these things are changing. And probably one of the most volatile reasons why your unfunded liability is going to either go up or down from what we expect are asset gains and losses. You got, as Michael said, over $800 million in the bank right now. And we have assumptions on what we would like to happen, but isn't always going to be what will happen. In 1/1/20, we're reflecting a 2019 asset gain or loss. Well, Michael mentioned we got an asset gain, but why does it look like it added to the unfunded liability? Well, that's because we don't really look at market value all the time. We look at a smoothing method that defers some of the gains and losses that we have. So this catches up, don't worry, the good gains of 2019 are reflected in here, but probably there are some kind of bad losses from 2018 that are also reflected in here. All right, so over time, I added all this stuff up. There's about $500 million in liabilities just on changes. All this is about $500 million. All right, so that's funding. So that, that's all the work that we do to get you your appropriation. But as you know, we also, and you probably, your auditors or the town accountants are usually looking for your GASB 67 and GASB 68 disclosures. We work with Clifton Larson Allen every year to prepare those disclosures, and so we have done that. We did that past summer, probably got all the reports either late September or early October. But remember, the GASB statements really don't have anything to do with your accounting for your appropriations, right? That's a funding policy. It's how we're funding the system, not how we're disclosing on your balance sheet or your P&L. So there are some differences. You might have gotten what's called a net pension liability for your system in the reports that we prepare for GASB. It's going to be different from the unfunded liability from this funding member unit statement, because it's just different in the methods and in the way GASB requires us to prepare those disclosures. So you definitely will see something different. One of the biggest differences is the GASB does not allow us to use the smoothing method on assets, as I just mentioned. So the grand total net pension liability for Worcester Regional under GASB is different than the unfunded liability for your funding reports. All right, and so this just gives you a little kind of side by side. The liabilities and information are not the same. So your funding would developed as of January 1, 2020. This is a brand new valuation too, by the way. It's based on new data, new retiree data, new assets. GASB 68, we actually rolled forward, and it's usually because of timing issues. We rolled forward the 1/1/18 valuation to get your December 19 disclosures. Appropriations, obviously, based on Chapter 32, and we allocate them, as we just talked about, to every member unit. And there isn't really anything called a pension expense in our funding calculations. But there's just, it's very different. And again, both reports are on the website that you can kind of see how those things differ. There's just different ways to compute a pension expense as opposed to a annual appropriation. So that's the funding and GASB situation. So with that, I can turn this over for questions, but I might add one more comment, and that is the infamous unit breakouts. We have received back some files on unit breakouts, and what those are some units have requested that we prepare a further breakout of, so we call it a breakout of the breakout. And we have gotten send out some files, got some back, prepared the breakout, sent some of them to the retirement office. So those are pretty much under control and almost finished. We're way ahead of schedule this year in preparing those. And so if anybody had any questions on those, I guess you could direct them to Colleen at the retirement office. Because I think those were going to be part of the package today, but I'm not quite sure. So I guess I'm going to stop sharing, or maybe I should hold on in case somebody had a question on a particular slide.
Okay, if you want, you can. Okay, so it looks like we have several questions in the chat feature. Just give us one moment here. We're going to unmute Michael Seiko, and we're going to also unmute Kevin. And Linda's going to stay off on unmuted, and maybe I can bring in Colleen as well to start answering some of these questions. So give us 1 second.
Just they were put on the wrong date. So they're up there. She's changing the heading.
So while we're doing this, I have I got a printout of a few of the questions on the member unit statements. They are online. Apparently there was an issue with the identification of them and how they appear on the website. Those are being changed as we speak. So everyone should be able to access those within the hour and see those. We did have a question regarding a comparison of the retirement system expenses to other retirement systems. Each year, PERAC, our oversight authority, the Public Employee Retirement Administration Commission, does produce an annual report on all of the retirement systems, and part of that report, they do conduct what they call an expense ratio. Historically, we have been run in a very lean fashion. Obviously, it's a large number because we're a large system and we have more member units than any retirement system in the Commonwealth. But percentage-wise and comparatively, we are on the lower end of the spectrum. We can get that information out to you if you'd like, and be happy to do that.
Michael?
Go ahead, Kevin.
Michael?
Yes.
Michael, on that, about 3 years ago, a conservative think tank called the Pioneer Institute conducted a lot of research on the public pension systems in Massachusetts. And according to their results, the Worcester Regional Retirement System ranked dead last when it came to expenses. So we were the leanest, with the lowest expenses of any of the 104 retirement systems across Massachusetts. And considering, in fact, we actually had fewer staff than I think most of the regionals as well.
Thank you, Kevin. And the Pioneer Institute also is not known as being public employee friendly. So they look at this very strictly, and so based on what Kevin just said from 3 years ago, and I don't think a comparison for this year there would be much of a change. As I said, we've always run a fairly lean operation. I think in terms of the unfunded liability, Linda, I don't know if you can see that question. One of the questions that came in was if the normal costs increase 8% and the appropriations increase 9.95%, can we really decrease the unfunded liability by 2035?
Hold on, grabbing my schedule here. The normal cost doesn't increase every year by 8%. All right, that's just how it kind of happened between remember, FY21 appropriation was developed using a different valuation, right? So we went, this is really like an experience change. We went from one valuation to the next. So the way the numbers kind of worked out is we had an 8% increase in the normal costs and the 11% increase on the unfunded. So the grand total increased 9.95. Our anticipation is that the employer that normal cost goes up by the way we think total payroll goes up, and that's just at 3.5. All right, so we think in the future from 2022 forward that the normal cost total increases by 3.5%. That is offset though by member deductions, which increase kind of oddly, right? We know we've got maybe, I don't know if we have any left, 5% contributors, 7% contributors, 8, 9, the +2. The employee deductions may not really increase the way payroll does because of the +2. So we do a projection of this, what we think employee member deductions will go out. So you might not, if you took your calculator to our funding schedule and you compare the normal cost year over year, it may not be exactly 3.5%. So that's how we can get there. We have to amortize that $898 million, right? And be able to pay it off by 2036 in our case. But what we've done is we say, well, yeah, if we did that, we would have a very large increase in year one. So we're going to say, yeah, let's not do that. We'll cap it at 995. So you can see, I think there's about 8, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years of the 995 cap. And then the schedule kind of works itself through to 2036. It's not really taking your calculator and plugging in the 898 million and amortizing it over a period of time because of this cap. So we just keep saying, what's the amortization? Oops, that's a 20% increase. Nope, make it 995. Then what's the next year? Amortize that over 1 fewer years and keep doing that. So it will get there. We're not, this is not projecting an 8% increase for normal cost every year or an 11% increase. This is the event of the difference between FY21 and FY22. I hope that answers that question or clarifies.
Thank you, Linda. And then the last question I believe that we received through the chat feature was, it was a question about our, says comparatively speaking, the Worcester Regional Retirement System is an underperforming system ranking near the bottom of the 100 systems in the state. Is there a historical reason why? I don't think that is actually completely an accurate statement. Let me just, to give you a brief history lesson, Linda alluded to 1988. Prior to 1988, there were, we were a pay-as-you-go system. So there were liabilities that were accrued that were not paid for, that the municipalities were not required to fund. Then in 1988, the legislature enacted a mandatory funding schedule, which at that time was a 40-year funding schedule, which required the systems to be fully funded by 2028. That statute has since been amended. It was increased to 2030 and then to 2040. So historically, and these numbers, you know, we can put something on the website for this. Historically, the Worcester Regional Retirement System has had investment returns on average of 8% over the 30 plus years history that they look at these numbers, which is a fairly robust number and one that has been generally above the benchmark for us. What happened in 2007 was that the legislature passed reforms that essentially compared all retirement systems versus the state pension fund, which is the PRID fund. And essentially what the legislature said, without much warning that it was planning on doing this, was that a retirement system that was not 65% funded and that had not performed within 2% of the PRID fund in the preceding 10 years would be required to go into the PRID fund. And you know, those numbers were arbitrarily determined. At that point, the retirement system and every retirement system in the Commonwealth had the ability to opt into the PRID fund voluntarily, and if those who didn't opt in voluntarily and who fell outside those parameters would then be mandated to go into the PRIT fund in perpetuity. We'd never be able to get out. So at that point in 2007, the board opted to go into the PRIT fund. Of course, what almost immediately happened in 2008 was the stock market crash, and the PRIT fund was, the way it was positioned, it probably suffered a little bit larger loss than some other retirement systems that had a different asset allocation. But overall, the PRIT fund has done well, and I believe that the 10-year number for us, I believe it 10-year return, it was number 44 of 100. You know, our system was number 44, or the PRIT fund was number 44, and our investments are closely aligned with the PRIT fund, but for a few legacy investments in some closed-ended funds. So, you know, that is where we are today in the PRIT fund. We are currently, as we do periodically, reviewing our asset allocation, our investment options, and that's an ongoing process that we review. But the PRIT fund, you know, is one of the funds that many retirement systems continue to invest with, and that remains an option for us to continue down that path. You know, we've tried to, obviously with liabilities, the other issue that comes to mind for us is with disabilities, and we have a very robust review process in evaluating disability retirements, with obviously our goal to be fair to the members and to ensure that every member who is entitled to a disability benefit receives that benefit, but any member who is not entitled for a myriad of reasons, the least of which is, despite what you may ever read in the newspaper, the least of which has to do with fraud, and more has to do with evidence and legal requirements that sometimes cannot be satisfied. But we've done an excellent job over the past, certainly the past decade, of limiting those and making sure that those cases are all vetted through a robust process before we make any decision on those cases. Kevin, do you have anything you want to add?
Just, Michael, I think you alluded to the fact that all systems, especially ours, making up for past sins, you know, for the first 40 years, I guess, or 50 years of the existence of the retirement system from 1937 to 1988, there was no contribution. It was a pay-as-you-go system, no requirement to fund. And so rather than fund the system, all systems continue to give the benefits and make the increases and all kinds of benefits, inclusions into Group 4, all kinds of changes like that. But there was never a corollary payment on that until 1988. Secondly, the system was less aggressive, and still is less aggressive when it comes to an appropriation schedule. Many other systems, 104 systems, most of them, with the exception of the regional systems, are a single employer, a single source for their funding. They go to a city council, Worcester goes to the city council and says, here's your bill, without much debate, without much input, etc., and it's paid. We're a multi-employer system. We've got 100 different units, 100 different towns, districts, etc. And we have been very cognizant of their budgets. And every time we make a change, every time we do evaluation, and we look at ways to confront this unfunded liability, we see there's only a couple ways to go about it. One is to really knock the ball out of the park in terms of our investments. The other is to increase appropriations. So, you know, when PERAC tells us to lower the rate of expectation in terms of our investment assumption, well, as Linda said during her presentation, there are things that, you know, that force things upward. In the State House, there was a saying, when you goose someone, you'd be surprised at where the ouches come from. So if we make any changes, the appropriations are going to go up so much so that it will be untenable for for our member units. So that's why the system, has taken, great steps, and we've gone to great lengths, and we've had great debate as to how we can lessen the blow on our member units, but at the same time meet our fiduciary responsibilities as trustees of the fund. Therefore, we decided that we would cap the appropriations at the 9.9% over a period of time. I think, Linda, you said that year one in the funding schedule, had we not capped it, would have gone up double, 20-something% perhaps. And I don't think that would be very appropriate for us to go back to our member units and say that, here you go. So that's the balance that we take. We are on a funding schedule. We have a degree of certainty that we are going to be fully funded by the date we've chosen, 2036. And we'll continue to work with our member units to ensure that the burden of paying off these unfunded liabilities accrued many, many years ago are not going to cripple their budgets.
The next question is from Ryan McLean. And thank you, Kevin. The next question is from Ryan McLean. Ryan, I'm being told that if you'd like, you can unmute and ask your question directly.
Sure, I appreciate everyone's work on this, and the meeting and the information is definitely helpful. It's helpful to see the assumptions that are made in creating these assessments for sure. My question is, in creating our own budgets in the municipal level, we're using assumptions that are maybe not as bad as they might have been last spring, but some of the worst that we've seen in some recent time. The assessment increase for my town would be conservatively 30% of all new revenue we have for the year, given the revenue constraints that are coming because of the recession. So I know it's going to come up to my boards, and my boards are going to ask, what happens if we can't meet this appropriation? Because this is without knowing what local aid will be at the state level and what the school assessments will be because of COVID-19.
So thank you for that question, Ryan. So the term appropriation is somewhat of a misnomer. We call it an appropriation, but it is an assessment. And as Kevin just alluded to, we've tried over the years to try and lessen and minimize the impact on the member units with the appropriation, which is an assessment. And I'm not trying to play semantics, but what it means as an assessment, it is an obligation of the participating towns, member units, districts, et cetera, to make this appropriation when it is due. So it's not a discretionary payment. It's not something that we really have any control over to say, okay, you can pay only a certain amount, or you can extend it out. We certainly recognize that the struggles and the challenges that COVID-19 has played with the municipalities, with the communities, with the revenues because of the lost income and tax revenue due to the businesses closing down. We're certainly not unsympathetic to that, but our hands are somewhat tied to provide any relief in the absence of the legislature providing us with the ability to provide some additional relief on that. Kevin, do you have any additional comments on that?
No, I guess, I don't want to trivialize this, and we feel your pain. We've consistently dealt with that issue at the board level through the years. We've seen good times, we've seen bad times, and that's why we've struggled with the balance of what maybe we should be doing in terms of increasing the funding, and what we what we need to do to protect the member units from the burdens of excess costs. So that's what we're trying to do, Ryan. We're trying to strike a balance, and it's tough. And I understand with the smaller towns, especially, it's tough. But
just to follow, I just want to put the ask in perspective. We have 13 full-time employees in Hubbardston, and our assessment is going up a little bit more than $50,000. So it would be helpful to understand, even at the minute level, the assumptions that went into the creation of this assessment, because this is really going to be competing against whether or not we can provide proper social distancing for students, whether we can afford additional fire department coverage, whether we can continue to offer additional police assistance for the enforcement of some of the issues that are going on. And I know that you have challenges, but this is just an assessment that, I put a 6 to 7% increase into my financial forecast and was laughed at by my finance committee, because they said there's no way that any costs could go up by 7% in this financial environment. So I don't know how to explain this to the public in a way that will make sense, I guess, unless I had more detail.
So I guess what I would say to you, Ryan, is that, we can, to the extent that you need more detail on the assessment, we can look at your particular situation. I think that's what, Linda was trying to explain to everyone, what goes into the assessment and the presentation, perhaps sharing the presentation with, with your board and the town fathers and so to speak, might be helpful in providing information. It is all those components that Linda talked about goes into the actuarial stew, if you will, and the numbers are what the numbers are, short of extending the funding schedule, which again is not something that we're considering at the moment, because all that does is provide perhaps some minor short-term relief, but add additional cost. It's no different than going from a 20-year mortgage to a 30-year mortgage. Your payment goes down, but your overall payments increase significantly. So, we're doing whatever we can to try and minimize the cost, and also, as Kevin alluded to, with the board not being overly aggressive on with its investments, that comes at a cost. So you can have a great year with being aggressive, but then during a downturn you have a terrible year. I think again, one of the other silver linings of 2020 in terms of the stock market was, if what happened in March happened in December, the numbers would have been staggering. Because of the downturn in the market, we actually were able to recover significantly from what happened in March, and that that certainly helped. But it would have been devastating if that occurred, in December, and that would have had been realized, obviously, in the next valuation of that loss.
And Ryan, and I'll mention this to everybody, as in the past, and we will do this again this year if need be, the board, and I speak for Michael, the board is more than willing to help by going physically. And I think 2 or 3 years ago, Ryan, I was up in Hubbardston, met with the Board of Selectmen. We will do that again as long as we need to. Your finance committees, your boards of selectmen, etc. We'll have to, I'm sure we'll be doing it by Zoom, but we can get the breakouts, explain some of them, and talk about it and answer some questions. Right, they can get it right from the horse's mouth. And I offer that to any of those who are participating today.
Thank you, Kevin. The next question is from Mark Hawk. Mark, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question.
Thank you. Good morning, Michael and Kevin. I just wanted to first say that the genesis of the question about the comparison was not to say whether or not the expenses were high or low, but when Linda started talking about, you know, this is the cost to turn on the lights, I had no idea if a comparison had ever been done. So I didn't know if those numbers were good, bad, or ugly. So that's where that question came from. The as a follow-up, and this is building off of Ryan's question a little bit, the information that I'm getting, I'm looking at the PARAC report that shows from 2019 that the Worcester Regional Retirement System is at 45.3%. Its 10-year history of appropriations has doubled, but its 35, 10, and even 5-year investment return history is not that great. It goes 8.28%, 8.78%, and then 5 years, 7.9%. So I realized that this year and last year may have been decent years, but I didn't understand why it was at 45%. And again, I'm coming from managing my own system in Gardner, so there's a little more control. And I didn't know if there was a historical reason other than, yes, the legislature does stuff that they shouldn't do, and they do that every day. But that's where I'm really coming from. It doesn't seem like we're on a good trajectory, and I'm wondering if the board has discussed this and said, well, here's some major shakeups that we need to do, whether it's in the asset allocation or something like that.
Thank you, Mark. And I'll certainly defer to Kevin on this. We are currently reviewing our asset allocation and our investments with the PRIT fund. You know, it is a process that is ongoing and lengthy. You know, what we're obviously our goal is to try and maximize return while minimizing risk, and that's, you know, sometimes that ends up resulting in a lesser return than some other investors who have decided to take more risk and have been fortunate that those risks have played out. But it is something that we're looking at, and it's something that we have. It's been on our agenda for a few meetings, and it will continue. The discussion will continue in 2021. We did hire an investment consultant to come in and you know, do a forensic investment audit, if you will, and to go through with us what you know, what exactly the PRIT fund invests in, and although we're obviously very much aware of that and invested, to coin a phrase, in that by reviewing it each month when we receive the numbers, and mine and Kevin's attending meetings to discuss the asset allocation. You know, the PRIT fund is a one-size-fits-all fund. They have their asset allocation that they believe is the appropriate model. So we are looking at that as a board. We are working with an investment consultant to review our assets and our investment strategy, and you know, that process is ongoing. Anything, Kevin, you want to add to that?
No, I think that it's a good point, Mark. One of the other issues is that prior to 1988, again, there was no requirement to fund. Some systems did, many did not, we did not. Prior to 2007, this system had invested very, very conservatively. Many systems had taken advantage of alternative investments, real estate, venture capital, et cetera, et cetera. This board, prior board, was very conservative. And, stocks and bonds, 60-40, a typical portfolio. Well, maybe not typical at the time. So when the board decided to go into the PRIT fund, since that time, since 2008, we've mirrored the return of PRIT. Again, as Michael said, we constantly reevaluate that. We did hire an investment consultant to look at maybe some other options, perhaps staying in, utilizing different sleeves within the PRIT fund, maybe increasing our asset allocation in certain areas, restructuring. Those are the only places we can get money is in the investments. We get it from the contributions. Those are set by statute, and we get it through the appropriations. So when we artificially cap the appropriations, we have nothing to do with the second leg, the employee contributions. We have only one other avenue, and that is to look at the investment return. So again, you raise a good point. It's a constant struggle that we're up against. And again, in many ways, we have two hands tied behind our back. Both hands. We have the third is what we're looking at, the investments.
Thank you, and that's good to hear. Just one final thought, and I don't want to dominate everything here. And looking at the asset allocation, I noticed that 9.5% is in real estate. I have no idea what that is, but it just as a, my personal feeling is that if we can divest ourselves of real estate, that's always good. But I'm sure the board is looking at that. So thank you very much, both of you.
Let me just say one thing about that, Mark. So and maybe we should get a little more information out, Michael, to the members about the quilt that PRIT puts together, in terms of where the winners and the high earners and the sort of the less high earners are. Historically, two of the asset allocations in the PRIT fund hit the ball out of the park. One is the investment in private equity. PRIT leads the country in the investments in private equity. And I'm talking about, 20, 22%, 23% returns with the private equity. The return on real estate, likewise, has been remarkable and has been one of the higher earners within the asset allocation. They've been fairly innovative with some of the investments, staying away from the more, less lucrative types of ventures, and they're actually buying office properties, etc. They do a lot of due diligence in the real estate portfolio, and it's one of their highest earners.
Thank you, Kevin. The next question is coming from Pat and Mary. That's how they're listed. So Pat and Mary, if you want to unmute and ask your question.
Yes, Pat Daly. Mary's my sister. We do meetings a lot together. So, I just had a question about the relationship between GIC and the pension, because we have an employee whose medical's, taken out of her pension, and they mail us a check. But then I had another employee who didn't pay his insurance and suddenly did for a couple of months, and that was pulled and paid too. But when I called them and find out how they got this information, they said that I gave that to them, and I never gave it to you guys. So why can't the employees why isn't the employer requested of this information? I've never got any statements. I've never gotten this statement of contributions you talked about. I just get the bill once a year. What is the relationship between you and GIC for health insurance? Somebody must notify you from there, because I have never sent you notification.
So we do have, thank you, Pat, we do have a staff person who is dedicated to working with the GIC. And we do have direct communication with them, and there is an exchange of information. What I think might be helpful with a question like this is I'd like to put you in touch with her directly, and I think she can probably walk you through all of this. So if you wanted to send me an email so that I have your email and that we can get that information to you as quickly as we can. And again, my email is michael@wrrboard.org.
WRRboard.org.
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Okay.
Thank you, Michael. It looks like that's the last question.
Great. So if there are no other questions, let us conclude the meeting. And let me say once again, thank you all for coming and attending. The offer to go out to your community to meet with your finance committees, your selectmen, is a standing offer. We hope that we'll get out of this Zooming soon with the vaccinations, et cetera. But again, thank you all for your patience. I also want to commend the staff who have been online as well. They've done remarkable work over the past year trying to hold it all together. And I also want to mention a big shout out to Jariah, who has helped us, all of us Luddites, to work our way through the technology. So again, thank you, everybody, and Happy New Year.
And I just want to echo that as well. Thank you very much for attending today. And as Kevin said, my plan was to go out and to conduct those meetings in person, but now we have the technology, and with your meetings, if any of you need me to come there, either physically or virtually, I'm more than happy to do that during the day, any night meetings, whatever it is that we can do to provide some additional information and have some continued dialogue on the subjects that are important to you. I look forward to hearing from you. So thanks very much, everybody. So thanks for joining us. If you have any questions, please feel free to give us a call and we'll be able to help you out.